Yeah. Very good. The next slides speak to one of the, I guess, necessary components of any course, to have some sort of timeline to keep students, pretty much aware of where they are in the history of the Bible. There's something distinctive, though, about what you've done in this timeline that I wanted to at least call attention to, if you would, before we move on to some of the other elements and features.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I thought was important was to make sure that we connect biblical events and people with the world at large. I think for students who do know something about the Bible going in, it's very hard for them to connect biblical events with the rest of the world. They don't think about what Plato might be doing when some things the Bible tells about are going on, or they don't recognize that the conquest of Alexander the Great have a big influence on the biblical world and the biblical story. So I try to help them see that biblical texts and characters belong in the same world as the other things that they study in history or other sorts of topics. Okay? And I think, too, that this kind of timeline can help in part of what I think liberal study has been interested in for a good while, and that is sort of decentering the West. And here we can see the way that the Persians or others had amazing kinds of cultural material before even folks in the West. Mm-hmm. So we get to see complicated societies, amazing, the references to amazing building projects or law codes, all sorts of things, religious thought, so that we know the world beyond the West and the world was important, and the biblical world is embedded in the rest of the things that are going on around.
Very helpful. Well, as we want to make sure that we leave time at the end for a discussion, maybe we can look at some of the next elements with just a brief comment on how they might help students who are using this particular text in their course of study.
So each chapter has an at-a-glance box that begins that gives the main topics of the chapter and highlights some things. I think they can serve as sort of a basic orientation. I think we can use them, professors can use them to ask students to discuss what they think about those topics before you do the reading, or maybe if they know anything about the characters that are listed there. So it just sort of helps the students understand what's to come, and then maybe be able to recognize the major headings. We had mentioned the way that students have that kind of short attention span and don't make connections. So this helps them begin to make those throughout the chapter.
Okay. The use of boxes is often used in books, and what is the function of the text box in your text as you've constructed them?
Yeah. There are two basic kinds of text boxes. Some reiterate things that are said in the text in order to give them emphasis, just so the students know that those are important things. The other sort of thing that they do is provide extra information. For example, there's a text box that tells about kinds of psalms that I don't mention in the text, or here in the picture, the one on dual names that talks about how some Jewish people in the first century had both a Jewish and a Greek or a Romanized kind of name. So, and that's important with Paul, who's also known as Saul. So if they can add things along the way that would have sort of broken up the text, or broken the train of thought in the text. And so having boxes allows us to provide that information without it sort of clogging up the logical flow. So in some ways, I think about them as attractive and accessible footnotes. So you get to fool your students into reading footnotes
anymore. That's a great device. Obviously, study Bibles are often used in this course, supplemented by additional books, textbooks, and so forth. You've included biblical passages or readings. Basically, very briefly, what is the thinking behind that?
Yeah. Well, students, as we said, often have almost no familiarity with the text of the Bible. So here, I try to kind of whet their appetites for reading the text themselves by giving them snippets along the way that have sort of important things that we have talked about in the text itself. So they don't have to take my word that it's there, and neither do they have to try to go find it in a Bible, which might take them days. So they can sort of find those most kind of juicy quotations right there.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
You also include charts and also at the end of chapters, key terms and chapter summaries. Let's review. Again, you may want to speak briefly to the pedagogic value of having these elements in a textbook.
Well, the charts try to kind of flesh out information that gets mentioned and sometimes provide some synthesis of various materials. The ones that are there on the slides, the one on the canons of the two different Bibles, that's never set out explicitly in the text, though we talk about it. So here you get to see how it works itself out. The other gives you sort of a chronological list of people we talk about, but never lists them precisely. So they help bring together some disparate materials at times in summary fashion that I hope is helpful. And then for the questions at the end of the chapter, those are ways, the let's review things, are ways that students can have kind of a touchstone for their notes. They can see if they've taken notes about the right things, and sometimes they can be even used in assignments if you want to assign them those key terms to know, or at least be able to say, on the test, you must know these. You get some of those key things worked out for them. And there is a glossary as well that has the definitions of all the key terms, so they can never complain they couldn't find the definition. It's always there somewhere. But I think those are good helps when we think about sort of helping students study.
And you also anticipated the questions on the next slide, the discussion and study questions that come at the end.
Right.
Assuming that you would use these perhaps in class as well as for writing assignments and so forth?
Yes, I would do both of those, I think. One of the things that I have sometimes done with texts that I've used, other texts I've used that have questions like this, is just to pick the ones that seem most important for the things that I might not be talking about in class, or that might be most relevant for the emphasis that I want to give the discussion. So, I might pick 3 out of 6 or something to be the ones I want my students to actually have written answers for, and that will help them see what I want them to think about. In addition, there are different kinds of questions that are included among these questions for discussion and study. Some of them are just sort of data that you can find in the text. Others ask students to think about what they have learned and sort of apply that in the larger context of understanding the Bible in general, or of understanding sort of how to make meaning in life. I intentionally included questions that would be more appropriate for a state institution teaching Introduction to the Bible, and some for a more church-related institution. So those, I think, have a wide enough range that they can be helpful wherever you are in getting students to be able to think about what they've just read, so they don't just, again, only regurgitate data.
Very good. Well, the last element is a companion website that accompanies the textbook. If you have a few brief things to say about that, and then we can get into some questions or queries that people on the phone may have.
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing is that there'll be things on here for professors and some for students. It will have sample syllabi for organizing a course. There will be multiple choice reading quizzes for each chapter and some section tests as well. There will be some chapter tests that are, not tied to just multiple choice, as well as exams. And there's going to be a list of online resources for students and for professors. There's a discussion of how to do biblical study past just what you get in the book here. So what the next books you might want to look at, there'll be a listing of commentaries that sort of say this series is more accessible and helps students move toward the more technical kinds of things so that they can do better study on their own, and a list of online resources that can, I hope, be helpful. In addition, for students who want to see if they are really getting what's going on in a chapter, there are some relatively lengthy chapter summaries for each chapter in the book. So I think a wide range of resources to be helpful to both students and professors.